This is the moment we've all been waiting for the thousands in attendance and the millions watching around the world. Let's get ready to
Welcome to In or Out, a rapid-fire game where we discuss a handful of NBA topics and determine where we stand. I'm Tony Pesta, joined by Jackson Flickinger and Corey Walsh, and the Cleveland Cavaliers have finally ripped off the Band-Aid, dismissing head coach JB Bickerstaff from his responsibilities. This is something we all saw coming, or at least we knew was a real possibility for the Cavs, and we are going to talk all about it today. Starting with this, Corey, are you surprised that JB was let go?
I'm not surprised he was let go. I was kind of more surprised with the amount of time it took to get to the decision to let him go. I feel like with every passing day was kind of making me less and less confident that he was going to be dismissed as the head coach of the Cavaliers. I feel like we all kind of saw where this was going to go if he decided to come back for another year. It wasn't really going to result in many great things for this team. The team, especially after that expose came out right after that was prepared, you can't really, after that, go back and be like, all right, guys, one more time, as half the team apparently just doesn't respect what the coach is saying. Donovan Mitchell probably wasn't the biggest fan of him either. I don't know. I know it said it in there, but you never know, like, if it's exactly true to that extent or not. But I think this organization is in the we need Donovan Mitchell to stay mindset. And if JB was going to be the domino that was between the team accomplishing that goal, then they were obviously just going to choose Donovan Mitchell over JB Bickerstaff almost every time.
Yeah, and me and Tony were really talking about this last year too. After the playoff loss to the Knicks, I felt like that was a really bad JB performance, especially because you lost to the Knicks kind of at your own game. Like, the Knicks were better defensively. They knew how to win a rock fight. And it felt like if you can't get your team that had better players to win a game, like to win a series, or at least even like put up a fight in a series that is kind of your style, then it seemed like the writing was already on the wall. This season, I mean, I don't know why it took as long as it did. JB did look good, and I think he did do a lot of good things, and I do think JB is a really good guy. But, like there were reports about if he lost that one game to the Pistons in December, then we're going to let him go. And it's like, if you're having those thoughts, then you probably should have already pulled the trigger. Like, if you, like, once you think there's a problem, the problem has already existed for a long time. So that's kind of a lot of my critiques that I have with the Cavs and kind of like the two bigs and the two guards is that, like, it seems like this problem has been there for a while and we just kind of want to look away and just see, oh, well, maybe it'll be better this time. And, like, I'm glad the Cavs finally have gone in a direction, but it just seemed like JB outgrew this job, last spring.
Yeah, I think that's what the part of the end of the season report that came out that mentioned that he was almost fired after the Pistons game and that potentially he had lost the locker room a while ago. Depending on how true that is, that's the part that's confusing, that it took this long to make that decision. I think Wendy said today, maybe I'm giving the quote to the wrong person, but I think it was Wendy who said Kobe almost, it's like he didn't really want to have to fire JB, but he felt like he had to. Did you guys see that, or am I making this up?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
Just wanted to clarify. So yeah, it did take a little longer than usual. Definitely seemed like the Cavs really thought this one through and made sure it was the right move for them. And I do think JB, to start off, giving him some credit where it's due. I think he deserves more credit than he often gets. NBA fans, especially Cavs fans, know how bad some coaches can be in the NBA. And JB rarely dipped into that category. No matter how angry his rotations could make us at times, he never fully went off the rails. You might say that's a low bar to clear, but hey, he cleared it. Not every NBA coach does. We see way worse situations occur every year for various teams. So I do hope JB gets another opportunity somewhere. I think he deserves another chance at coaching in the NBA, but ultimately for the Cavs, they had to press some buttons. They can't afford to totally run it back this year or next year, even if they don't make as many sweeping changes as some may want. They had to change something. And so we will see what they do if they bring in a new coach, ideally, and a new coaching staff, because I think Luke Walton needs to go as much as anyone, maybe even more than anyone else. And let's see if a change of a new approach can help them iron out some of these wrinkles.
And I do think it's important to point out that JB has been a pretty good 82 game coach. Like I think what he's done, especially through the injuries this year, and I think last year he did a really good job in the regular season of optimizing the offense. It didn't have there wasn't a lot of variety in the offense, but it really was optimized and like kind of its best version of itself for an 82 games season. And I think this year, there were definitely ups and downs, but I think he prepared them for that. I think a lot of the issues come in the playoffs, and I think it's more so the issues from last year, because I think he had a decent playoffs this year, all things considered.
Yeah.
So that's where it's like, all right, if we're kind of firing him because of some of his shortcomings last year, why didn't we fire him last year? And that's kind of where I'm kind of at with this, where it's like, I don't think if you're just judging like the Boston series, like what more could have, like no coach could have done anything more, considering everything that piled up against him. I think he handled the Orlando series pretty fine.
Biggest issue there would have been the rotations with Orlando, but other than that, the actual game plan seemed fine.
Yeah, and I think it's, there are definitely issues, but none of the issues that we've seen this year were new issues. Like the offense didn't have a lot of variety to it. Well, has the offense under him ever had any variety to it? So it's like, and like those are the things that are fine in the regular season over 82 games, but not in a short series.
I would say the major thing that is different between this year and last year, and it's the thing that kind of had him maintain the job, is that he was a culture builder for this team, and that he cultivated this learning environment where all the young players, the Cavs are just drafting basically their roster and trading for young players on swings. And he helped them develop to a certain point. But as we even saw in that report, like when veterans outside of the team come into this culture that on the surface seemed like it was all like happy-go-lucky with the young guys, they're like, wait, this is kind of like a pacifying environment, and it rubbed them a lot of the wrong way. And I feel like it's that very culture that he built and maintained with this roster that in the postseason last year, we were kind of seeing that there was he kind of lost his voice a little in that after that postseason. People were questioning him from there. And like you were saying, Jackson, like that probably should have been the point. And if that's your starting point going into the next season, being like leaving with questions about your head coach and the culture that he built, and then you're bringing in more veterans that are kind of seeing it from a new perspective, and those voices are kind of bouncing around, it kind of just spelled disaster for this culture, for the team full of players who are just who are still growing and are just used to only hearing this one voice until they've heard outside perspective.
Yeah, before we move on, I want to go back to Jackson said there wasn't much variety in the offense. Well, hey, back in the day, you could have Andre Drummond airball a post hook. He could airball a three-pointer. He could give you a coast-to-coast turnover. They used to run a lot of different stuff.
That's true. Those are
JaVale was in his bag.
One thing I like, I really do like JB. I think he's a great guy, and I want to say that he's, this was my first year ever covering the NBA, and JB was super nice to me and always respectful when I stuttered over my stupid questions. He always gave me a good answer. So like, if I was in his spot, I wouldn't give me a good answer. So like, I just want to, like point out that I think he's a really good guy, and not like none of this is personal or anything like that, but, but yeah, it is really funny how much JB really liked Andre Drummond. Like anytime Andre Drummond was brought up, like his face would like light up. Like even, like every time they played the Bulls, it'd be like, oh, so like, like the generic question before the game, well, what do the Bulls do good? And he's like, they're rebounding, man, like Andre Drummond. And you're just like, all right, man, cool.
JB had the vision for that 2-3 big lineup for a long, long time, and Drummond was the first time he could really dive into that basketball sicko stuff. So, moving to our next topic here, and something that we have kind of already touched on a little bit. I'll let Jackson start because he mentioned it a little bit. Do you think JB was a scapegoat? Because I think there are deeper issues with this roster than just JB. But there's also a case to be made that this was a necessary starting move for the franchise. So where are you at on this?
Yes and no. I think that there are a lot of. I think when you look at Garland, Mobley, and Okoro, I think they've all been like optimized in what they currently do, but they haven't been pushed out of their comfort zone to expand their game. And I don't know if like I feel like that could be an organizational wide failure, but who are you like are you going to fire the entire organization? No, that's not how these things go. So is that all on the coach? No, but that's kind of who's going to bear the brunt of that. So I do think that, JB had time to kind of work out an offense that was better for Garland and Mitchell. He had time to work out an offense that made more sense around Mobley and Allen. And he, like the offense that he came up with right after the Mitchell trade looks pretty close to what it was, the last time we saw them all healthy. And that's kind of the issue where it's like, no, he's not the reason Darius Garland doesn't move off ball. No, he's not the reason Mobley hasn't developed as a 4 or a 5. I mean, maybe he is kind of, but you know what I mean, where it's like, you can't blame everything on him, but if you're going to blame somebody, who else are you going to blame?
I feel like saying he's a scapegoat would point that his firing was solely because of the postseason. And I feel like the postseason was probably one of the last reasons he was honestly let go. I feel like this organization only feels a lot of pressure, especially from Donovan Mitchell, that they want to ascend to that like upper crest of the East. And they kind of have been in this middle ground for the past 2 seasons of Mitchell. But I feel like the bulk reason of why JB was let go was more a culmination of this season and last season, where it was just repeated struggles in areas like Jackson was saying. The offense in 2 postseasons hasn't been the best overall, but it's also he's at the will of the sum of his parts, and this team just felt like offensively it chugged at times. And it's not JB. I felt like JB was pretty creative with all of the solutions he had to come up with on the fly within the past years. This has been probably one of the more injury riddled teams in the league over the past 2 seasons. It felt like there were very rare stretches where he was able to use his best 5 players all at once. And JB, for as long as he's been the coach, has constantly been creative and tinkering with lineups that most people would scoff at. I mean, the opening game like 3 seasons ago had 3 near 7-footers in the lineup, and everyone was saying, what is JB doing here? And no one, and then immediately he was getting his flowers. And now 3 seasons later, we're just saying how uncreative offensively he got down the stretch. I mean, it's like fair to say he was a scapegoat in the broad sense, but I feel like this postseason would be unfair to say as to why JB was let go.
Yeah, I'm right there with you, both of you guys. I think to a degree, yes, he was a scapegoat, but there was still a reason to move on. I think it was a necessary move at this stage. And I'm going to ramble a little bit because I think this kind of highlights my issue with JB while also being fair to him with the way the roster was constructed. JB tried to implement a motion offense. He talked about it all the time. We saw it when the Cavs personnel reflected that play style when it was Mitchell and Allen out there. They had more space and they played with tempo. The issue is you can't force play. We complain about the offense being stagnant, but in reality, they don't isolate very often. It's just they run so many pick and rolls. And it's because they have 2 guards who excel in that style and 2 bigs who also excel at pick and roll. So you have to play to your strengths. And it's just difficult to have any off-ball action going on when you're running a pick and roll as the primary action. You kind of just have to space the floor in those scenarios. And that's why you get so many guys standing around. The Cavs look so bogged down. And so, to be fair, I think retooling the roster would have given JB an opportunity to do some more things. I think he deserves credit for December and February when they implemented the things that he talked about. That style of basketball wasn't a mistake. He wanted them to play like that, but the real issue and something that we saw for basically his entire tenure. He couldn't get the Cavs organized for long stretches on offense. They just could not execute consistently under him. And I don't know what it takes to make a team execute consistently, but it's what's required at the highest level. There's not some like magic offensive play that JB is just missing in his toolbox. It's just his teams don't execute with any sort of consistency. We see stretches where they move the ball, they play with pace, they cut, they screen, everyone's involved. But then we see them revert to those old habits. We see them over dribble, poor shot selection. They stand around, they're not moving. And that's partially the player's fault, but it's really, it's not only JB, but the entire coaching staff. Because if you want to win in the NBA and in the playoffs, you have to execute better than your opponent. And I think the Cavs have failed to do that under JB. It's not just missing open shots. It's poor execution. Even when their shots are falling, we see them like the Karis LeVert against the Celtics, even Max Strus at times where they're going on a run and then you get a really bad Karis possession that's a step back three, or Max Strus pulls a really deep three early in the shot clock when they're within striking distance. Those are the type of plays that the organized teams, the teams that know how to execute consistently, they don't do stuff like that as often as the Cavs did. And I think that's ultimately the thing that is JB's downfall.
One thing I will say, the kind of pushback where you're like we saw them kind of play with the motion that he kind of wanted them to in that December through February stretch. That kind of play style was mostly just like, okay, Donovan, you cook and you move the ball and your aggression and your movement is going to just create movement for everybody else. It wasn't like the Kings where it's like, all right, all five guys are going to touch the ball. Everyone's going to be okay with dribbling. Everyone's going to be okay with passing. It was still the same thing. And that's where I think some of these issues come from, where it's like, all right, Isaac Okoro's out there. We don't trust him to actually be a functioning piece of this offense. We have to keep the ball in Garland, Mitchell, or LeVert's hands at all times. And those are the guys who are going to make all the plays for us. And that's where I think, you're going to have, like, that's what I think the issue is. And that's, like, when you're so reliant on those guys to do something, you don't have anything to fall back on. That's how you get those bad LeVert possessions. That's how you get, like, all right, Max Strus, you might as well take a 30-foot jumper, with 20 seconds left in the shot clock. Because it's like, there's no, like, guiding principle. And I think that's the issue. The guiding principle was, Garland, you got to play faster. Mitchell, you got to play with more force. Not, all right, well, we want you to pass, move away from the ball, pass, move away from the ball, pass, move away from the ball. Oh, if you have an opening attack, like, that's not what they were. They were very much like, all right, we're going to see if this pick and roll gets me open. We're going to see if the help comes from the corner. We're going to, like, they're all just kind of reacting off of that and not, there's no structure.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with that. I think they still never established that offensive identity. They didn't really have many. We talked about this a lot recently, but they just didn't have that go-to action other than a pick and roll, which is just, it's too predictable. They didn't really have many counters for it. And so moving along to our next topic here, you can go two different ways with this, but would you consider JB's time in Cleveland a success? Now, you can answer that from JB's perspective individually, the Cavs perspective. I guess I'll start off with this one, because I would say individually, I would say for JB, I mean, I guess it depends on how you define success. I won't go Giannis on you guys, but I would say it's a success. Listen, he stepped in as a midseason fill-in. He managed to help steer the team in the right direction. I know he didn't get out of the second round. He didn't get as far as he probably wanted to be. So from that perspective, you could say it's a failure. Obviously, getting dismissed is never a sign of success, but we can talk about the players being the reason for the team's success, but JB certainly guided them early on in the process. And so from that standpoint, I would say a slight success for the Cavs as well, because he helped establish the defensive identity that really got them to this point. He just couldn't get them. He couldn't carve out that offensive identity. And that's what they're looking for now with whoever comes in to replace him. So kind of yes and no. But Corey, was this a success for JB or the Cavs?
I really feel like this was a success for the team and for JB as a whole. I mean, what he stepped into was something that very few coaches were probably jumping at the bit to be a part of. The team was just plunged of all of the assets whatsoever. It looked like a very bleak situation to be entering. A lot of young players. And they just were coming off the John Beeline disaster. I mean, whoever was going to step into there was just entering a media firestorm at the time. We weren't really expecting such a stabilizing presence from JB, and he earned his way throughout that second half of the year to earn his keep. I don't know how much of that was the team looking around and realizing no one still wanted the job. And JB was, of course, going to sign up to be an NBA head coach. I mean, that's what all the assistant coaches, I feel like, are aspiring to do. I feel like saying that JB was dismissed as a sign of being failure is a little unfair because not many coaches retain their job for their entire career with one team. They hop around pretty frequently. I mean, Frank Vogel was an NBA champion head coach and was dismissed from the Lakers just a season later.
And the Suns.
But they didn't win anything. And
yeah, but just after one season still.
we see coaches win coach of the year and get fired right after. So I agree with your point there.
Yeah, and just like to keep like taking the big look back on his overview of his tenure, this team from where he started to where it ended to where their aspirations are Eastern Conference champions are competing for the Eastern Conference championship or higher. That's a pretty large leap in just a short amount of time for JB. It's like I feel like we kind of squeezed all the juice we could out of the JB Bickerstaff lemon, I guess, in this case, but overall, like it was an important part for this team's development, and I feel like they can truly go up from here. And when you look back on future Cavs seasons, if they end up being successful, you have to point to JB Bickerstaff to at least being the reason that they get to a certain point where this next coach can step in and take them to the next level.
Yeah, to build off of Corey's point, I definitely agree that this is a massive success for JB and the organization. This was a bad situation that he stepped into. And I think that he was put into a really awkward spot, even when he was asked to be John Beeline's assistant. I don't agree with how the Cavs went about that. Obviously, the Beeline hire didn't work. But putting somebody like JB into that spot where he's kind of like the mentor almost to Beeline, like this is how the NBA works kind of guy. That's a really tough position to be in, especially, like there's a reason why they had to make him one of the highest paid assistant coaches at that time, because that's a really tough job. And he navigated the team through that. He navigated the team after that. He put them in a position to go all in for the Donovan Mitchell trade, and that would have seemed really impossible if you said, in the middle of that John Beeline, you're like, hey, in a year and a half, the Cavs are going to be going all in for a guy like Donovan Mitchell because they really believe in this team and the direction of this organization. Like, you would have been laughed at and everything. But that's what, JB turned this around. So this is a massive success. I think his shortcomings of the last 2 years are kind of predictable. But that doesn't take away from the massive turnaround that he led.
Yeah. I said I wasn't going to go Giannis on anybody, but listen, it's okay to not be the championship head coach because very, very few are. I think what JB managed to accomplish was a success. Even if it's not the ultimate success, I think he should feel good about what he did. And I really do think he deserves another chance somewhere. I don't know what team he would go to, but I think he's proven enough, especially a rebuilding team should be interested in bringing JB back at some point. Moving along here to our final topic, and something that, of course, is on everyone's mind is who will the Cavs bring in to replace JB? So we'll start off, Jackson. Are there any candidates that stand out to you?
James Borrego. I really like what he did with Charlotte. I think he would be a really good fit. I just think back to, was it like the 2020 season where he really, Devontae Graham and Terry Rozier, he had them looking like really good players. Like he constructed a really good offense.
That was a lost memory for me.
Exactly. So he constructed a really good offense around them. He did a really creative job of getting like the best out of nothing, really. And especially like an undersized backcourt like that. So I think he's somebody who, like, if you don't want to trade Darius Garland, I think he's somebody that I think if you hired him as your head coach, I think you could actually convince, Garland's camp like, hey, this is James Borrego's really good with working with a smaller backcourt. He's able to optimize this in a way that, JB wasn't. This is his specialty. He's going to make sure that, Donovan looks good. He's going to make sure you look good. And he's going to, really make this all work. So I think that if you want to, if you're in the Darius, let's keep Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell camp, he's the guy that I think could really elevate both of them. Kemba's best year as a pro came with him as a head coach, and then 2 years later, there was other issues, but, Kemba fell off the map pretty hard. And
yeah.
I don't want to say that Borrego was the only reason why Kemba was good, but I think he really does know how to optimize an offense and get the most out of his guys.
I think that's a great point.
Sorry.
No, go ahead. I was gonna move it to you anyway. I was just giving Jackson some flowers. Who are your picks?
Thank you.
I don't have a particular favorite in mind. I have more questions about one that I see is very popular right now, and that's Kenny Atkinson. I'm confused for two reasons. One being, correct me if I'm wrong here, but Kenny Atkinson was known as the guy who developed the bits and pieces of the Brooklyn Nets into a somewhat competitive playoff team. And I feel like the Cavs team is not in the, hey, let's hire another developmental type coach phase in their organization right now. And another reason that they said that his strong connection with Karis LeVert and Jarrett Allen, and I must be blind or something, but I've seen Jarrett Allen in every rumor to be sent out immediately. And I think Karis LeVert is also getting his bags ready. So I'm also confused why we're using that as a main point for why Kenny Atkinson needs to be on this roster. I mean, if either of you two are seeing something I'm not, please shed some light, but I'm very...
The resurgence is over.
I think it might be. I was going to actually make the same point because I was going to give a cop-out answer and say, I don't know who would be the right coach because I don't know what the roster is going to look like. Now, obviously, the Cavs know what the roster, or at least they have some idea of what they're going for this summer, so they'll be able to make the right choice. Ideally, you want someone who can orchestrate an offense. Again, I think that's the main downfall of JB is that he wasn't able to get them to execute the right way. But don't overlook the need for a defensive-minded coach as well, because the team, they might not be a powerhouse on that side of the floor. If they trade Jarrett Allen, obviously we'll see what happens. You add a wing potentially. Maybe Mobley is able to play full-time center. We'll save that for a whole nother episode, but there's no guarantee that the grass is going to be greener by firing JB. And so whoever you bring in, like Kenny Atkinson and James Borrego, each of them have less experience than JB as a head coach. And so you're taking a gamble here. I think it's something that, as much as everyone, even including me, was ready to move on from JB, scenario where you don't improve. And so this is a little sketchy. I think if you can bring in an offensive-minded coach, that should be the objective. That should be what you're aiming for, because there's clearly a lot here that is left. They haven't unlocked just yet. But again, it kind of comes down to what the roster is going to look like to determine who you want to bring in as head coach. So I'm going to cop out, not give a direct answer.
I do think that defense is more important in the regular season, in the sense that if you want to make a leap, and I think we saw the Magic do this, if you want to make a leap, improve on the defensive end of the floor, because you can bring that every single night, and it's going to be really transferable, especially if you're kind of playing a weird kind of defense, like the Cavs were with the three bigs. Teams don't really game plan for the regular season the same way. So there's only so much that each team can do, and that gives you a chance in every game. Whereas I feel like in the playoffs, you can only go so far as a defensive first team. Once everyone's game planning, it's really it's a lot easier. And I think we're seeing this the Mavericks, and I think people and the Pacers to a lesser degree, where you can fine tune an imperfect defense, or at least, especially if you have a couple really good pieces like the Mavericks do, you can kind of optimize that. You can't really do the same thing for an offense. You can't say all right, Max Strus, we're going to create so many open looks, you're going to be a 40% 3-point shooter. You can't do that the same way on that end. So that's where I think your ceiling is much more dependent on your offense than it is your defense. And that's where this team needs to improve. And it may not look good in all 82 games. You're going to have some games we had games this year against the games against the Kings and Thunder really stick out, where the defense was just so bad because it didn't really have like a plan. It seemed like
Mhm.
if you go with an offensive only guy, you're going to have games like that. But you hope that in the playoffs you'll be able to cobble together a defense, and if the offense is optimized, you have a much higher ceiling.
Yeah, I do agree that good offense usually trumps good defense, especially when you're talking about championship runs. That's kind of what they're built on. So yeah, I only mention that because I do see a lot of people saying like, oh, who cares about the defense? Well, if you do trade Jarrett Allen, maybe that becomes more of a priority, but still bringing in some fresh offensive minds, that should absolutely be the goal. Any final takes here? Any farewell words to JB? Listen, I think he was a better coach than he gets credit for. I will say that, but I also think it was the right move to move on. Could backfire if you don't manage to find a good replacement. Things would get ugly there, but I think this was a necessary risk that they had to take.
I think anything that's going to backfire will be not coaching related. Like if Mitchell
Sure.
leaves, that's backfiring. If, Garland or Mobley stagnates, like things like that, I think would lead to more of a backfire. And I don't know if that's like JB related entirely. So like I don't think it's going to backfire like in that way, or at least if it does, it's not going to be the coach's fault.
Well, you're saying that now. Wait until Luke Walton is promoted and he's their new head coach.
Well, if Luke Walton's promoted, that's a different conversation.
We got another Warriors assistant, Luke Walton.
Hey,
Mike Brown is the worst thing that has happened. His success is the worst thing that could have happened because now everyone who's the second man up in Steve Kerr's coaching rotation is going to be the first person that gets thrown out for jobs. I'm like, well, Mike Brown's pretty good.
Well, I was even looking at Luke Walton's coaching career because I was like, how does he still have a job? Like, has he ever been a good coach ever at any point? And I completely forgot about that brief Warrior stint where
a really tough job,
a Mickey Mouse run where hey, Stephen Curry's the greatest player all of a sudden, and they're winning every single game, and Luke Walton's kind of just there for the ride. Shout out to Luke Walton. Nepotism never fails. Riding the Curry coattails doesn't either.
It's wild that he gets like all the kind of like he gets the praise from that, whereas Mike Brown was basically the acting coach when they won one of those championships. And nobody's ever like, oh, Mike Brown has a ring. You gotta respect the championship coach. So I think I
would, if Mike Brown becomes available, I would be cool with a reunion.
Yeah.
Jackson's so.
He cut Sam Merrill. So
you're conflicted. It's understandable.
Yeah, there are things
you
to
like
learn
about your
that.
Mistakes.
Hopefully he did. But I do have one more take that I want to get off my chest right now.
Let it fly.
The Boston Celtics absolutely suck. And I think that we're not talking about this nearly enough. They are frauds. And they're, the Pacers suck.
You would be surprised if the Celtics won the championship?
Yes, I would be surprised. Unless unless Dallas or Minnesota come through that series and they're like, Anthony Edwards doesn't have a leg anymore. Kyrie Irving can't, he's too beat up to, do anything unless that happens, I would be surprised.
Kyrie beating the Celtics would be weirdly gratifying, despite the fact that I'm not a bandwagon and I'm not necessarily I won't take ownership of that championship by any means, but it would be nice to see.
Mavs honestly, for Cavs part 2.
Yeah. I wouldn't be surprised if the Celtics won the championship. I would say I would pick either Western Conference team as the favorite, but I wouldn't be surprised if Boston won. I don't think they suck.
Frauds. They're awful.
I feel like they're gonna lose in 6.
You think so?
Yeah. I'm not liking series? What I'm seeing. Yeah.
Corey.
This current series?
Yes.
Scorching hot take at the end. Hey, things would have been scary if they lost
air horns?
Which they should have. No,
I
was
wanted
going to do them, but I can't.
I was honestly thinking when Jackson was talking about the Cavs offense in certain situations, how they stagnate. The Celtics are that type of offense, except the only difference is their talent level throughout their starting 5 is way higher, and they can basically get by with having those stretches, and the Cavs simply could not.
I will say they miss Kristaps more than anybody gives them credit for, I think.
Yeah, that
for sure.
That does kind of change things. But I think Joe Mazzulla has a lot of JB problems in the sense that he figured out what works. Like their style of offense works over 82 games, and it works really good against we don't care if you leave Al Horford open, he's going to shoot every possession. Eventually, he's going to make him, and we'll be fine. Like that, you can get by the Cavs when they're running out, Marcus Morris for 35 minutes. You can't get past evenly matched teams without adjusting, and I think that's where his problems lie, and I think that's kind of where some of JB's problems lied. In a certain way, it's just that Mazzulla has a much better process and a much better team. That the Boston Celtics they do have good players. Derek
White being one of them.
I will say,
Mazzulla,
not on the all defensive team. That's outrageous.
I think he deserved it. I don't know about Jrue, but and I do just want to say before we let Corey jump in, Mazzulla does have a lot of JB problems, except he still has his hair. I will give him credit. He doesn't have that problem just yet.
I will say that JB has Embiid on timeout selection. Joe Mazzulla, hands down, has the weirdest timeouts I've ever seen. It's all right, we're on a roll. We just inbounded, timeout. It's wait, what's happening? He kills more fast breaks than any coach I've ever seen in the league. It's we're about to go on a 10-0 run. Once we finish this fast break, never mind. Let's call a timeout. Let's collect ourselves.
It's strong JV high school coach vibes where it's I don't like what these guys are doing. You missed the box out. I don't care if we're winning. We're calling a timeout anyways. And it's what's happening? There was one time where Garland was past the he fell down on a layup attempt, and it was the ball squirted out, and it was probably a 4-on-3, and Joe Mazzulla is running out to midcourt, and you're just what are you doing, man? That's a free 2 points.
Well, now that we've wrapped up our Joe Mazzulla rant as well, that's all for this episode. And we're out. I want to thank everyone for tuning in. Please drop a comment with who you want to see as the Cavs' next head coach, and feel free to send parting words for JB if you want to leave any. And with all that being said, go Cavs.
I agree. Go Cavs. Brian, we're looking for Fear the Sword volunteers. Are you in?